I am Abigail, 29 years old, and I have always been the responsible one. The one who worked extra shifts at the hospital while my sister partied. The one who stayed behind to care for Mom after her surgery while everyone else went on vacation. The one who arrived at my cousin Julia's wedding alone because my career as a nurse always came first. I heard the whispers as I walked in, saw the smirks, felt the judgment. My sister Amanda leaned over to our mother. She couldn't even find a date. If only they knew what was about to happen. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that subscribe button and join me for a wedding no one in my family will ever forget. The thing about families is they assign you roles early and expect you to play them forever. In the Carter family script, I was cast as the responsible one, while my younger sister Amanda was the pretty one. This wasn't subtle typecasting either. My parents made sure we both understood our designated lanes from childhood. Abigail, why can't you put a little effort into your appearance like your sister? Mom would sigh while I studied for AP biology. Meanwhile, Amanda was being praised for her latest modeling photo shoot or cheerleading trophy. Dad wasn't much better. Books won't keep you warm at night, Abby, he'd joke whenever I mentioned academic achievement. But when Amanda brought home yet another boyfriend, it was all proud smiles and welcomes to family dinner. Don't get me wrong. I love my sister. Amanda has a magnetic charm that draws people in. But beneath her perfect smile and designer clothes, she has always been deeply insecure. Perhaps that's why she felt the need to remind everyone of my shortcomings at every family gathering. Last Thanksgiving was particularly brutal. I had just been promoted to charge nurse in the intensive care unit. At 31, I was the youngest person to hold the position at Baltimore Memorial. When I tried to share the news during dinner, my mother cut me off to announce that Amanda's boyfriend Harold might be proposing soon. We could have another wedding to plan, she squealed, while my promotion evaporated from the conversation like steam. After dinner, Aunt Eleanor cornered me by the dessert table. Any special man in your life, Abigail? She asked this every holiday. Like my relationship status was a medical condition that might have improved since her last checkup. Just focusing on my career right now, I said, the words so practiced they had lost all meaning. Such a shame. A pretty girl like you shouldn't be alone. She patted my hand like I had announced a terminal diagnosis. I drove home that night feeling invisible. Not because I needed their validation about my career. I was proud of what I had accomplished. What hurt was the constant implication that without a partner, my life was somehow incomplete. Less valuable. Waiting to begin. As Julia's wedding approached, the pressure intensified. My cousin had been dating Patrick for barely 8 months before he proposed. But somehow they were the family success story. The wedding was to be the social event of the season, with relatives flying in from across the country. You could try those dating apps, my mother suggested during our weekly call. Plenty of nurses find husbands that way. Maybe you could bring someone to Julia's wedding. I didn't tell her I had already tried 3 different apps, endured 12 mediocre dates, and had nothing to show for it except some awkward goodnight handshakes and a newfound appreciation for being alone. Jacob from radiology had seemed promising at first. Smart, reasonably attractive, could discuss topics beyond sports and the weather. But after 4 dates, he confessed he wasn't over his ex Marcus, the lawyer I met through a hospital fundraiser. Turned out to be married. And Sean, my last attempt at finding wedding companionship, ghosted me after we slept together. 2 weeks before the wedding, I surrendered to reality. I would be attending alone. I bought a deep blue dress that cost more than I should have spent, practiced neutral responses to inevitable questions about my love life, and promised myself I would focus on celebrating Julia rather than absorbing family judgment. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather and a text from Amanda. Can't wait to see you. Bringing Travis. He's a surgeon BTW. The subtext was clear. Even if I worked with doctors every day, I wasn't good enough to date one. As I drove to the Belmont Hotel where both the ceremony and reception would be held, I tried to center myself with positive thoughts. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe someone would ask about my recent research project on improving trauma response protocols. Maybe I could enjoy a family event without feeling like I was auditioning for approval. The GPS announced my arrival as I pulled into the hotel's circular drive. A valet opened my car door with a practiced smile. I handed over my keys, straightened my dress, and took a deep breath. "You are successful," I whispered to myself. "You save lives. You have good friends. You are enough." But as I walked toward the grand entrance with its sprawling floral arrangements and elegant signage directing guests to the Julia and Patrick celebration of love, the familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. The automatic doors slid open, welcoming me into the air-conditioned lobby, where clusters of well-dressed relatives already gathered. And just like that, I was 10 years old again, standing at the edge of the playground, waiting for someone to invite me to play. The Belmont Hotel was transformed into a fairy tale setting for Julia's special day. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the cream and gold-decorated ceremony space. Delicate orchid arrangements lined the aisle, their subtle fragrance mixing with expensive perfume as guests found their seats. A string quartet played softly in the corner, adding to the atmosphere of refined elegance. I paused at the entrance, scanning the room for a friendly face. Instead, I caught my mother's eye as she sat with my father in the fourth row. She gave a tight smile and a small wave that somehow managed to convey disappointment. Dad nodded in acknowledgement before turning back to his conversation with Uncle Robert. Taking a deep breath, I walked down the side aisle toward the section reserved for family. Heads turned as I passed. Not because I looked stunning. I had put effort into my appearance. My dark hair was styled in loose waves, makeup carefully applied to enhance rather than mask. The blue dress complemented my fair skin and fit perfectly. But the looks weren't admiration. They were assessment, evaluation, and I was failing before I'd even taken my seat. "Abigail's here," I heard someone whisper. Alone again. The seat beside my mother was occupied by Amanda's designer purse. She stood nearby, radiant in a blush-colored gown that probably cost 3 months of my rent. Her arm linked with a tall man I assumed was Travis. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me, then narrowed as she leaned toward our mother. "She couldn't even find a date," Amanda whispered, loud enough that several relatives turned to look at me. My cheeks burned as I approached. "Hi, Mom, Dad." "Amanda." I nodded to Travis. "Nice to meet you. This is Travis Shepard," Amanda announced proudly. "Chief resident at Boston General." Travis extended his hand. "Pleasure. Amanda tells me you're a nurse." "Charge nurse in intensive care," I clarified. "How nice," he said, in the condescending tone some doctors reserve for support staff. "Must be rewarding." Before I could respond, my mother interrupted. "Abigail, you remember your Aunt Eleanor? She was just asking about you." Aunt Eleanor materialized beside us, pulling me into a cloud of floral perfume and criticism disguised as concern. "Darling, you look healthy," she said, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Working too many hours, I imagine? Is that why you're still single?" "No time to meet someone." "I enjoy my work," I replied evenly. "Of course you do, dear. But there's more to life than work, isn't there?" She patted my arm. "My neighbor's son just got divorced. Very handsome. Works in insurance. I could introduce you. The ceremony is about to start," I said, grateful for the timing. "We should take our seats." We filed into the row, and I found myself seated between my father and a second cousin I barely knew. Amanda and Travis sat with my mother, already looking like the perfect couple in a wedding magazine spread. The ceremony was beautiful in that standardized way that looks good on Instagram. Julia was a vision in white. Patrick looked appropriately smitten. They exchanged personalized vows that made most of the women cry. I found myself thinking about the 3 patients I had lost last month despite our best efforts. How relative our definitions of tragedy really are. After the ceremony, guests formed a receiving line to congratulate the newlyweds. I waited my turn, practicing my smile. "Congratulations, Julia. Everything is beautiful," I said when I finally reached her. "Thanks for coming, Abigail," she replied, her eyes already drifting to the guests behind me. A quick, impersonal hug, and I was dismissed. Patrick barely acknowledged me before turning his charm on the next guest. The reception was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, where round tables surrounded a glossy dance floor. I checked the seating chart and found my name at table 19. Not with my parents and sister at table 2. Not with any cousins my age. Table 19 was positioned near the kitchen entrance and populated by elderly relatives I saw once a year, my 12-year-old second cousin who hadn't looked up from his phone since arrival, and the bride's former college roommate who appeared to have been invited out of obligation rather than affection. The leftovers table, I muttered to myself as I took my assigned seat. Aunt Gertrude squinted at me through thick glasses. "You're Barbara's girl, aren't you?" "Abigail. Catherine's daughter," I corrected gently. "Still not married?" she asked. Loud enough for neighboring tables to hear. "Not yet," I replied, reaching for my water glass. "In my day, a girl your age would be considered a spinster," she announced. "But I suppose with all these career women nowadays, it's different. Though the biological clock doesn't care about your career, dear." I nodded politely, taking a long sip of water. Across the room, Amanda was laughing at something Travis said, her hand resting on his arm, her eyes occasionally darting to me to ensure I was witnessing her happiness. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and I maintained my smile through it all. But when the dance floor opened and couples began to sway to the music, the weight of being alone among families and pairs became too heavy. "Excuse me," I murmured to no one in particular before slipping away from table 19. I found refuge in the luxurious hotel bathroom with its marble countertops and fresh flower arrangements. Leaning against the sink, I finally let my carefully constructed expression fall. The woman in the mirror looked tired. Not just from the day, but from years of measuring herself against impossible standards and always coming up short. A single tear escaped before I could stop it. I brushed it away quickly, angry at myself for letting their judgment affect me. "You are enough," I whispered to my reflection. But in the echoing emptiness of the bathroom, even I didn't sound convinced. After composing myself in the bathroom, I decided to take a short walk through the hotel before returning to the reception. I needed a moment away from the constant reminder of my apparent inadequacy in my family's eyes. The Belmont's elegant corridors opened into a magnificent lobby with soaring ceilings, contemporary art, and comfortable seating areas where hotel guests relaxed with drinks and conversation. I found an empty armchair near a massive stone fireplace and sank into it, allowing myself 5 minutes of peace before rejoining the wedding festivities. The soft murmur of conversations and the distant sounds of the hotel bar created a soothing background noise compared to the reception's driving music and forced laughter. "This seat taken?" a deep voice asked. I looked up to find a man gesturing to the chair across from mine. Tall with broad shoulders, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that suggested serious money. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd just run his hand through it, and his eyes were an unusual shade of gray-blue that reminded me of storm clouds. "No, go ahead," I replied, expecting him to take the seat and focus on his phone like everyone else in the modern world when sitting alone. Instead, he leaned forward slightly after sitting. "You look like you're hiding from something," he said with a perceptive half-smile. "Or someone." I raised an eyebrow. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to another person who recognizes the look," he replied. "I'm Alexander, by the way." "Abigail," I said, surprising myself by offering my real name rather than a polite deflection. "So, Abigail, what brings you to the Belmont on this fine Saturday, besides avoiding whoever put that look in your eyes?" His directness was both disarming and refreshing after hours of family members talking around what they really wanted to say. "My cousin's wedding," I admitted. "Currently in progress in the grand ballroom." He nodded knowingly. "Family weddings. Battlegrounds disguised as celebrations." A genuine laugh escaped me. "That's exactly what they are." "Let me guess," Alexander continued, his expression thoughtful. "You're being subjected to the 'when are you going to settle down' interrogation. Or perhaps the 'why are you still single' inquisition. All of the above, plus the 'you brought shame to the family by coming alone' silent treatment," I said. surprised by my candor with this stranger. Alexander leaned back in his chair. People put so much emphasis on having a +1, as if arriving with another human somehow validates your existence. Exactly, I exclaimed, perhaps too enthusiastically. It's as if all my other accomplishments mean nothing because I walked in alone. And what accomplishments might those be? He asked, seeming genuinely interested. I hesitated, unaccustomed to someone actually wanting to hear about my work. I'm a charge nurse in an intensive care unit. Recently implemented a new protocol that improved our trauma response times by nearly 20%. That's impressive, Alexander said, without the condescension I'd heard from Travis earlier. You're literally saving lives, and they're worried about whether you have a date to a wedding? Welcome to the Carter family priorities, I said with a rueful smile. If you don't mind me asking, he said, why did you come alone? Was it by choice or circumstance? The question could have seemed invasive from someone else, but his tone held no judgment, only curiosity. Both, I suppose. I answered honestly. My work schedule makes dating challenging, and my last few attempts weren't exactly successful. But ultimately, I decided I'd rather go alone than bring someone just for the sake of having a +1. Alexander nodded approvingly. Authenticity over appearances. Rare quality these days. What about you? I asked, realizing I'd been doing most of the talking. Are you here for business or pleasure? A bit of both, he replied enigmatically. I have some business interests connected to an event here tonight, but I've been delaying my entrance. Stage fright. I teased. He laughed, a warm sound that seemed to light up his face. More like strategic timing. Some entrances are more effective when properly scheduled. Our conversation flowed easily. Moving from career aspirations to favorite books to travel destinations we hoped to visit someday. Alexander spoke passionately about sustainable technology and educational initiatives his company was developing. I shared stories about memorable patients who had changed my perspective on life and healthcare. There was something refreshingly genuine about him. Unlike most men I met, he asked follow-up questions that showed he was actually listening. He didn't check his phone once during our conversation or glance around looking for someone more interesting to talk to. You know, he said after I described a particularly challenging case, what you do requires extraordinary emotional intelligence and technical skill. It's strange that your family doesn't seem to recognize that. They're not bad people. I found myself defending them, despite everything. They just have a narrow definition of success. Marriage. Children, the white picket fence. Anything else is seen as a placeholder until the real life begins. And what do you think real life is? Alexander asked, his gaze intent. I considered the question seriously. I think it's finding purpose. Connections that matter. Not necessarily romantic ones. Just authentic relationships with people who see you for who you are. Something shifted in his expression. That's exactly it, he said quietly. Being seen for who you are, not what you represent. A comfortable silence fell between us, broken only when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it briefly. I apologize, but I need to make my appearance soon, he said, standing reluctantly. It's been a genuine pleasure talking with you, Abigail. Likewise, I replied, surprised by how disappointed I felt at the conversation ending. Perhaps we'll cross paths again before the night is over. He added with a smile that suggested he knew something I didn't. I should get back to the reception before they send a search party, I said, though no one had likely noticed my absence. As Alexander turned to leave, he paused. For what it's worth, I think anyone who doesn't value what you bring to the table is missing the best part of the meal. With that enigmatic comment, he walked toward the elevator bank, leaving me with a curious warmth that had nothing to do with the nearby fireplace. I made my way back to the grand ballroom, somehow feeling lighter than when I'd left. The conversation with Alexander had reminded me that there were people in the world who valued substance over appearance, who could see beyond conventional markers of success. As I re-entered the reception, I straightened my shoulders and lifted my chin. Maybe I couldn't change my family's perception overnight, but I could refuse to let it diminish how I saw myself. By the time I returned to the reception, dinner had been cleared and the celebration was in full swing. The dance floor was crowded with couples moving to an upbeat song, while others gathered around the open bar or huddled at tables in conversation. At table 19, Aunt Gertrude appeared to be dozing off while my young cousin remained hypnotized by his phone screen. I considered finding a quiet corner to wait out the remaining obligatory hour before I could politely leave, when Amanda intercepted me near the dessert table. "Where did you disappear to?" she asked, her tone suggesting concern, but her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Just needed some fresh air," I replied, selecting a miniature cheesecake from the elaborate display. "Mom was looking for you. She wanted to introduce you to Patrick's Uncle Stanley. He's divorced, but has his own accounting firm." She delivered this information as if announcing I'd won a lottery. "How thoughtful," I said flatly. Amanda frowned. "You could at least try, Abigail. We're all worried about you." "Worried about what exactly?" "That you'll end up alone. That you're so focused on your career you're missing out on what really matters." The familiar frustration bubbled up. "And you get to decide what really matters in my life?" "Don't be dramatic," she sighed. "Look at Travis. He has an important career too, but he still makes time for relationships." On cue, Travis materialized beside Amanda, placing a possessive hand on her lower back. "Everything okay here, babe?" "Fine," Amanda smiled up at him. "Just sister stuff." Travis gave me a condescending nod. "Your sister was telling me about your situation. If you want, I could introduce you to some doctors at my hospital. Most of them prefer nurses anyway. Easier dynamic, you know?" I stared at him, momentarily speechless at the casual sexism. Amanda misinterpreted my silence as interest. "See? Travis is trying to help. The least you could do is be appreciative." I opened my mouth to respond when a sudden hush fell over the room. The music didn't stop, but conversations paused as heads turned toward the ballroom entrance. The massive double doors had been thrown open dramatically, and framed within them stood Alexander. He looked even more commanding than he had in the lobby, his presence immediately dominating the space. The perfect cut of his suit, his confident posture, the subtle aura of authority. He stood momentarily surveying the room, nodding politely to a few guests who clearly recognized him. "Is that Alexander Hayes?" Travis whispered, sounding uncharacteristically odd. "Who?" Amanda asked, but Travis was too busy staring to answer. "The Alexander Hayes," another guest nearby murmured. "The tech billionaire. The one who revolutionized renewable energy storage." "What's he doing at Julia's wedding?" someone else wondered. I stood frozen, processing this new information. The Alexander I'd had a heartfelt conversation with by the fireplace was apparently famous. More than famous. Wealthy and powerful enough to cause this ripple of excitement through a room of strangers. My thoughts were interrupted as Alexander began walking purposefully through the crowd. People stepped aside, creating a path. Several reached out to shake his hand or introduce themselves, but he acknowledged them only briefly, clearly moving with intention toward a specific destination. Toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs as Alexander approached, his gray-blue eyes locked on mine. Amanda and Travis stared in confusion as he stopped directly in front of me, taking my hand in his. "Sorry I'm late, love," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The Tokyo investor call ran longer than expected. Before I could process what was happening, he leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on my cheek. His cologne smelled of sandalwood and something uniquely his own. "Play along," he whispered in my ear. "I'll explain later." Pulling back slightly, he spoke again at normal volume. "You look absolutely beautiful. That dress is exactly the color I imagined when you described it." I became acutely aware of the widening circle of silence around us as more guests noticed Alexander Hayes apparently greeting his date. Amanda's mouth had fallen open, her eyes darting between us in disbelief. Travis seemed equally stunned, his previous condescension replaced by confusion and a hint of respect. "Alexander," I managed to say, finding my voice. "I'm glad you could make it." He smiled warmly, still holding my hand. "I wouldn't miss it." "Now, aren't you going to introduce me to your family?" As if on cue, my parents materialized beside Amanda. My mother's expression was a complex mixture of shock, confusion, and sudden, calculating approval. "Mom, Dad," I said, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. "This is Alexander Hayes. Mr. and Mrs. Carter." Alexander extended his hand to my father, who shook it with visible surprise. "Abigail has told me so much about you. Thank you for raising such an extraordinary woman." My father, normally confident in any social situation, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "The pleasure is ours. We didn't realize Abigail was expecting company. Last-minute change of plans," Alexander explained smoothly. "I insisted on coming even briefly rather than missing the chance to support Abigail at her family event." My mother found her voice. "How exactly do you two know each other?" Alexander turned to me with a smile that somehow conveyed both conspiracy and genuine warmth. "Should I tell the story, or would you prefer to?" The ball was in my court. I could expose the charade now, admit we'd just met, and return to being pitted Abigail. Or I could play along with whatever game Alexander was proposing and enjoy watching my family recalibrate their entire perception of me. It wasn't really a choice. "We met at the hospital fundraiser last month," I improvised. "Alexander was a major donor to our new pediatric wing. Abigail was the only person there more interested in discussing patient care improvements than networking," Alexander added, his hand now resting lightly on my lower back. I found that refreshing. Amanda stepped forward, extending her hand. "I'm Amanda, Abigail's sister. And this is my boyfriend, Dr. Travis Shepard." Alexander shook their hands politely but without the warmth he'd shown my parents. "Abigail's mentioned you. You work in Boston, correct?" "Chief resident at Boston General," Travis said quickly. Alexander nodded, already turning his attention back to me. "Darling, I believe they're playing our song. Would you care to dance?" No specific song was playing, just generic reception music. But he led me toward the dance floor, leaving my family staring after us, completely frozen in disbelief. As Alexander placed one hand properly at my waist and took my hand with the other, I finally found the words to ask the obvious question. "What exactly are you doing?" I whispered as we began to move to the music. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "Creating a more interesting ending to your wedding story, I hope." The expression, "the tables have turned," never felt more literal than in the moments following Alexander's dramatic entrance. As we moved across the dance floor, I became acutely aware of the shifting attention in the room. Guests who had previously looked through me now watched with undisguised curiosity. My relatives who had offered pitying glances earlier now appeared eager to make eye contact. "Everyone's staring," I murmured, trying to focus on following Alexander's confident lead. "Not at me," he replied. "They're looking at you, wondering how they missed seeing what I apparently saw." "Which is what exactly?" I asked. His expression softened. "Someone worth crossing a room for." The simple statement caught me off guard. Before I could formulate a response, the song ended and Alexander smoothly guided me back toward the edge of the dance floor where, predictably, my parents were waiting. "Alexander," my mother began, her voice honeyed with newfound warmth, "we simply must introduce you to everyone. Julia would be thrilled to know such a distinguished guest is attending her wedding." "I'm not here for networking, Mrs. Carter," he replied politely but firmly. "I came to accompany Abigail. But we would be happy to say hello to the bride and groom together, wouldn't we, darling?" I nodded, still processing the surreal situation. As Alexander took my hand again, my father cleared his throat. "I've followed your work with renewable energy solutions, Mr. Hayes. Quite impressive for someone your age." "Thank you," Alexander replied. "Though if you want to discuss impressive accomplishments, your daughter recently implemented a trauma response protocol that's saving lives at her hospital. Has she told you about it?" My father blinked, clearly caught off guard. Well, not in detail. "You should ask her sometime," Alexander suggested. The technical challenges she overcame were remarkable. The hospital administration is considering implementing her system across all departments. This wasn't entirely fictional. The protocol was real, though the administrative response was still pending. What struck me was how Alexander had retained this detail from our brief conversation and was now using it to subtly redirect my parents' perception. As Alexander guided me toward the newlyweds, we were intercepted by various relatives suddenly eager to meet my date. Aunt Eleanor appeared particularly determined, practically stepping into our path. "Abigail, darling, you've been keeping secrets," she accused with a forced laugh. "And who is this handsome man?" Alexander extended his hand. "Alexander Hayes. You must be Aunt Eleanor. Abigail mentioned you were concerned about her romantic prospects. Rest assured, they're in good hands." Aunt Eleanor's smile faltered slightly at his directness. "Well, I simply want to see Abigail happy." "As do I," Alexander replied. "Though happiness comes in many forms beyond relationship status, don't you agree? Abigail's professional achievements bring her tremendous fulfillment." "I find that incredibly attractive." Before Aunt Eleanor could respond, Alexander skillfully maneuvered us away, leaving her speechless for perhaps the first time in her life. "You didn't have to do that," I said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." We made our way to Julia and Patrick, who had clearly been briefed about the unexpected VIP at their wedding. Julia's previous dismissiveness evaporated as she embraced me with newfound enthusiasm. "Abigail, you should have told us you were bringing such a special guest," she exclaimed. "We would have seated you at the family table." "Last-minute arrangement," I explained, the lie becoming easier with repetition. Patrick shook Alexander's hand vigorously. "It's an honor, Mr. Hayes. Your investment in quantum computing is revolutionizing the field." "Congratulations on your marriage," Alexander replied graciously. "Abigail speaks highly of you both." More pleasantries were exchanged before we could politely extract ourselves. As we moved toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, Alexander snagged 2 champagne flutes from a passing server. "Two authentic connections," he said, clinking his glass gently against mine. "And strategic entrances," I added with a small smile. We found a relatively secluded spot near tall windows overlooking the hotel's illuminated gardens. The reception continued at full volume behind us, but we had created a small bubble of quiet. "I think now would be a good time for that explanation you promised," I said, taking a sip of champagne. Alexander nodded. "I was invited to this wedding for business reasons. The groom's father is on the board of a company I'm considering acquiring. I had planned to make a brief appearance, shake the right hands, and leave. So this is a business event for you," I clarified. "It was," he corrected, "until I met you in the lobby and had the most genuine conversation I've experienced in months." "And the dramatic entrance as my date?" Alexander's expression became more serious. "2 reasons. First, selfish ones. At events like this, I'm normally surrounded by people wanting something from me. Business connections, investment opportunities, social media photos. Being seen as your date rather than Alexander Hayes, potential investor, offered a refreshing change." "And the second reason?" I prompted. "The way you spoke about your family," he said quietly. "It reminded me of my own experiences before my company took off. The constant judgment. The narrow definitions of success. I thought perhaps I could help rewrite the narrative, even if just for one evening, by making them think I'm dating a billionaire." He winced slightly. "That sounds manipulative when you put it that way. I prefer to think of it as helping them see you through fresh eyes." I considered his explanation, surprised to find I wasn't offended. It was certainly effective. My sister nearly swallowed her tongue. Alexander laughed. "Not my primary objective, but a satisfying side effect." As we continued talking, I learned more about the real Alexander. Beyond the public persona of the successful entrepreneur was a person with insecurities and frustrations not unlike my own. He spoke of the loneliness that came with his position, how people often valued what he represented rather than who he was. The irony is that the more successful I became, the harder it was to form genuine connections, he confessed. "Everyone either wants something or assumes I want something from them." "Is that why you approached me in the lobby?" "I had no idea who you were." "Exactly," he nodded. "You spoke to me like a person, not a portfolio." Our conversation flowed naturally, covering everything from childhood memories to future aspirations. Alexander described growing up in a modest Michigan household. His father's early death, his mother's struggle to keep them afloat. His scholarship to MIT, the failed first startup, the unexpected breakthrough that led to his current success. In turn, I shared more about my journey through nursing school, the mentors who shaped my approach to patient care, my dreams of eventually creating a more humane critical care model. You know, Alexander said after listening intently to my ideas, with the right backing, that model could be implemented as a pilot program. I have connections at several teaching hospitals who might be interested. Are you offering to invest in my hypothetical healthcare initiative? I asked, half joking. I'm offering to connect you with people who would recognize its value, he replied seriously. Your ideas deserve to be heard, Abigail. The genuine support in his voice affected me more deeply than I expected. While my family focused on my relationship status, this virtual stranger was taking my professional aspirations seriously. The moment was interrupted when Amanda appeared beside us, slightly unsteady from champagne. Mother wants to know if you and Alexander will join us for brunch tomorrow, she announced. Her gaze fixed on him rather than me. I'm afraid I have a flight to San Francisco in the morning, Alexander replied smoothly. Perhaps another time. Amanda pouted slightly. That's too bad. We have so many questions about how you two got together. It's all very surprising. The emphasis on surprising carried clear implications about her disbelief that I could attract someone like Alexander. The best connections often surprise us, Alexander said, placing his hand over mine on the table. Don't you agree? Amanda's smile tightened. Absolutely. Though some are more surprising than others. As she walked away, I sighed. She doesn't believe we're really together. Does that bother you? Alexander asked. I considered the question. Not for the reasons you might think. I don't need her to believe I can catch someone successful. I just wish she could see me as whole without external validation. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. Family approval is a complicated desire to outgrow. As the evening progressed, we continued to navigate the reception together. Alexander's presence beside me gradually shifted from a shocking plot twist to a comfortable partnership. We developed an effortless rhythm of private jokes and subtle communications that made it easy to believe we were actually a couple. When the cake was cut and traditional dances completed, Alexander checked his watch. I hate to cut this short, he said with genuine regret, but I do have that early flight tomorrow. Of course, I replied, surprised by my own disappointment. Thank you for whatever this was. He smiled. I believe the traditional term is being a date. Though perhaps an unconventional one. Very unconventional, I agreed. But also the best wedding date I've ever had. High praise, he laughed. Though I suspect the competition wasn't fierce. Non-existent, actually. This was my first wedding date. Something shifted in his expression. Then I'm honored to have been the first. Would you allow me to be a more conventional date sometime? Dinner perhaps, when I'm back from San Francisco. The question caught me completely off guard. You're asking me out? For real? I am, he confirmed. No audiences, no family dynamics to navigate. Just two people who enjoyed talking to each other, continuing the conversation. Before I could answer, commotion from across the room drew our attention. Amanda was gesturing animatedly toward us while speaking to a small group that included my parents and several aunts and uncles. I think your sister is building a case against our relationship's authenticity, Alexander observed. I sighed. She always needs to be the center of attention. Shall we address it before I leave? He asked. It might be better to let it go, I suggested. She'll find something new to focus on soon enough. Alexander considered this, then shook his head slightly. I think some truths might be worth addressing, but only if you're comfortable with it. I realized he was right. Walking away would only leave Amanda's narrative unchallenged. And perhaps facing this directly was the first step toward changing the dynamic that had defined our family relationships for too long. Lead the way, I said, standing up straighter. Let's see what Amanda has to say. We approached the group where Amanda stood at the center, her voice carrying despite her attempt at a conspiratorial tone. Travis hovered nearby, looking uncomfortable but making no move to intervene. It just doesn't make sense, Amanda was saying as we drew closer. Abigail shows up alone as usual, disappears for an hour, and suddenly returns with one of the most eligible bachelors in the country? Something doesn't add up. My mother frowned. Amanda, perhaps this isn't the time or place. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, Amanda insisted. This whole relationship seems manufactured. Why haven't we heard about him before today? Because Abigail's personal life is her own business, my father said, surprising me with his defense. Amanda scoffed. Since when? We discuss her perpetual singlehood at every family gathering. Perhaps that's been the problem. Alexander's calm voice cut through the tension as we joined the circle. Amanda's eyes widened briefly before she recovered her composure. Alexander. We were just discussing how wonderful it is that you and Abigail found each other. Were you? He asked pleasantly, though his tone carried an edge. It sounded more like you were questioning the authenticity of our connection. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Aunt Eleanor cleared her throat. We're just surprised, dear. Abigail has always been so, focused on her career. As she should be, Alexander replied. Her work saves lives. Of course, my mother interjected quickly. We're all very proud of Abigail's professional accomplishments. Are you? I asked quietly, finding my voice. Because this is the first time I've heard that tonight. My mother looked taken aback. Darling, of course we're proud of you. You have an interesting way of showing it, I continued, emboldened by Alexander's supportive presence beside me. Every family gathering becomes an inquisition about my relationship status. My promotion to charge nurse was dismissed in favor of discussing Amanda's boyfriend. My research project wasn't worth mentioning compared to Julia's engagement. We just want you to be happy, my father said defensively. No, I corrected him gently. You want me to be what you consider successful. There's a difference. Amanda stepped forward, her expression hardening. So you manufactured a relationship with a billionaire to prove a point? How desperate is that? Amanda, my mother gasped. I felt Alexander tense beside me, but I placed a hand on his arm. This was my battle. You're right about one thing, Amanda, I said calmly. Alexander and I aren't in a relationship. Murmurs rippled through the group. Amanda's expression shifted to triumphant vindication. We met for the first time tonight, I continued. In the hotel lobby while I was taking a break from feeling inadequate at yet another family function. I knew it, Amanda declared. This whole thing was a pathetic attempt to gain attention. Actually, Alexander interrupted, his voice level but authoritative. It was my suggestion. And if anyone should be embarrassed by tonight's events, it isn't Abigail. All eyes turned to him. When I met Abigail earlier this evening, I was struck by her intelligence, compassion, and genuine nature. In our brief conversation, she spoke more thoughtfully about meaningful work and authentic connections than most people I encounter in months of business meetings. He looked directly at Amanda. She also spoke of her family with remarkable generosity, given how you apparently treat her. She defended you even while acknowledging the hurt your judgments have caused. Amanda's cheeks flushed. You don't know anything about our family dynamics. I know what I witnessed tonight, Alexander replied. A brilliant, accomplished woman being valued only in relation to her dating status. And when that status appeared to change because of my presence, suddenly everyone wanted to acknowledge her. My father shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Hayes, with all due respect. Family matters are complicated. They certainly are, Alexander agreed. But some things should be simple. Like recognizing your daughter's worth regardless of who stands beside her. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. I felt strangely calm, as if a weight I'd carried for years had finally been set down. I love you all, I said, looking at each family member in turn. But I need you to understand something. My life has value as it is. My work matters. My choices are valid. And while I'm open to finding partnerships someday, my worth isn't dependent on that happening. My mother's eyes had filled with tears. Abigail, we never meant to make you feel less valued. I know, I said gently. But impact matters more than intention. And the impact has been years of feeling like I'm failing at life because I prioritize different things than Amanda or Julia. Is that really how we've made you feel? My father asked, genuine concern in his voice. Before I could answer, Amanda stepped forward, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. Stop making yourself the victim, Abigail. Some of us worked hard to create successful lives with both career and relationships. It's not our fault you couldn't manage both. Amanda, my mother warned. No, let her finish, I said calmly. This is important. Amanda crossed her arms. You've always acted superior because of your important job. Like the rest of us are shallow for wanting normal things like marriage and family. Then you show up with this performance tonight to make us all look foolish. Well, congratulations. You got everyone's attention. I took a deep breath, truly seeing my sister perhaps for the first time. Behind her anger was something I recognized all too well. Insecurity. Fear. The desperate need for validation. I've never thought I was better than you, Amanda, I said quietly. And I've never thought you were shallow. I've actually envied how easily you connect with people, how naturally you navigate social situations that I find challenging. Her expression faltered slightly. But we're different people with different strengths and priorities, I continued. My work fulfills me in ways I can't even describe. Your relationship with Travis clearly brings you joy. Why can't both paths be valid? Because. She began, then stopped, seeming unsure how to continue. Because society tells us there's one correct timeline for success, Alexander suggested gently. Especially for women. Education, career, marriage, children. Deviate from the sequence or skip a step, and suddenly you're doing life wrong. Amanda looked at him with sudden recognition. As if he'd articulated something she'd felt, but couldn't express. It's easier to judge someone else's choices than to question the standards we're all measured against, I added. An uncomfortable silence settled over our circle. Travis, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Amanda, maybe we should give your sister and her friend some space. Amanda hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Fine. Enjoy the rest of the reception. As they walked away, my parents exchanged uncertain glances. Abigail, my father began awkwardly. I had no idea you felt this way. Because you never asked, I pointed out, not unkindly. You've been so focused on what you think my life should look like that you never bothered to ask what I want it to be. My mother reached for my hand. We only want what's best for you. I know. I squeezed her hand gently. But I'm the one who gets to define what best means for my life. She nodded slowly, tears threatening again. You're right. We haven't been fair to you. Or truly supportive. It's not too late to change that, I suggested. My father cleared his throat. Perhaps we could have dinner next week? You could tell us more about this research project of yours. The simple offer, so long withheld, nearly broke my composure. I'd like that. As my parents moved away to speak with other relatives, Alexander and I found ourselves alone again in the midst of the reception. That was quite a confrontation, he observed. Thank you for standing up for me, I said. Though I'm not sure anything will really change. Change happens incrementally, he replied. The important thing is that you stood your ground. You spoke your truth. I nodded, feeling emotionally drained but somehow lighter. I should probably let you go. You mentioned an early flight. Alexander checked his watch and grimaced. I've already stayed far longer than I intended. But I don't regret a minute of it. Neither do I admitted. About that dinner I mentioned earlier, he said. Hesitation evident in his voice for the first time all evening. I meant it, Abigail. I'd like to see you again. Properly this time, without the pretense. The sincerity in his eyes caught me off guard. This wasn't just politeness or pity. He genuinely wanted to continue whatever connection had formed between us tonight. I'd like that too. I replied honestly. He smiled, relief evident in his expression. I'll be back from San Francisco on Wednesday. Would Thursday evening work for you? I'm off shift at 6. Perfect. I'll pick you up at 7? From your apartment, not another family function. I laughed. Definitely less dramatic that way. Alexander reached into his jacket and produced a business card. My personal number, he said, writing on the back before handing it to me. Text me your address? I will, I promised, tucking the card into my clutch. He hesitated, then leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on my cheek. For consistency's sake, he explained with a smile. Wouldn't want anyone questioning our previous performance. Of course, I replied, fighting a blush. Purely practical. Alexander's eyes held mine for a moment longer. Good night, Abigail. Thank you for making what would have been a tedious business appearance into something memorable. Good night, Alexander. Thank you for helping me rewrite my wedding story. As he walked away, disappearing through the same doors he dramatically entered through earlier, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. The evening had been surreal, exhausting, and somehow transformative. For the first time at a family event, I felt truly seen. Not just by Alexander, but finally, possibly, by my family as well. And most importantly, by myself. 6 months later, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror adjusting my earrings. The woman reflected back at me looked different somehow. Same dark hair, same blue eyes, but there was a confidence in her posture, a certainty in her gaze that hadn't been there before. Abigail. Alexander called from the living room of my apartment. We should leave in 10 minutes if we want to make our reservation. Almost ready, I replied, giving myself the final once-over before joining him. Alexander stood by the window, silhouetted against the city lights. He turned when I entered, his expression warming. You look beautiful, he said, a statement of fact rather than flattery. So do you, I replied, taking in his casual elegance. After 6 months, the sight of him still caused a flutter in my chest. Not because of his wealth or status, but because of the person I'd discovered beneath those external markers. Ready to face the Carter family dinner? He asked with a slight smile. As ready as I'll ever be, I answered honestly. The monthly family dinner had become a tradition following Julia's wedding. Initially awkward and tentative, they had gradually evolved into something I approached with less dread and occasional moments of genuine connection. The drive to my parents' suburban home was filled with comfortable conversation about our respective weeks. Alexander's company was expanding its educational technology division, while my trauma response protocol had been fully implemented across 3 departments at the hospital. Did you tell your parents about the award nomination? Alexander asked as we turned onto my parents' street. Not yet, I admitted. I wanted to do it in person. The Baltimore Medical Association had nominated me for their annual Innovation Award, recognition that still felt slightly unreal. They'll be proud, Alexander said confidently. I think they actually will be, I agreed, still somewhat surprised by the gradual shift in family dynamics. My mother opened the door before we could ring the bell, enveloping me in a warm hug before greeting Alexander with equal enthusiasm. Perfect timing. Your father just opened the wine to breathe, she said, ushering us inside. The house smelled of roasted chicken and herbs, comforting and familiar. In the living room, my father rose to shake Alexander's hand and kiss my cheek. Good to see you both, he said sincerely. Abigail. I was just reading about that new patient monitoring system your hospital is implementing. Impressive stuff. The simple acknowledgement of my professional world would have been unthinkable a year ago. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Where's Amanda? I asked, accepting the glass of wine my mother offered. She and Travis are running a bit late, my mother replied. Something about a patient emergency. Amanda and I had reached a fragile truce in the months following Julia's wedding. Our relationship wasn't suddenly perfect, but there was a new honesty between us that felt like progress. She had even called last week to ask my advice about a nursing shortage at her hospital, a professional acknowledgement that meant more than she probably realized. When Amanda and Travis arrived 20 minutes later, the tension I once would have felt at seeing them was notably absent. We exchanged genuine, if slightly reserved greetings before settling around the dining table. So, Alexander, my father began as he carved the chicken. How's the new solar project coming along? As Alexander described his company's latest innovations, I observed my family with a sense of detached wonder. The dynamics had shifted in subtle but important ways. My mother asked thoughtful questions about my recent research. My father referenced an article related to healthcare policy he'd saved for me. Even Amanda mentioned a patient case where she'd used principles from my trauma protocol. The difference wasn't that they had suddenly become different people. Rather, I had changed how I engaged with them. I no longer sought their validation or measured myself against their expectations. That simple shift had altered the entire family ecosystem. After dinner, while my mother and Amanda cleared the table and my father showed Travis his new workshop in the garage, Alexander and I stepped onto the back porch for a moment of quiet. "You're smiling," he observed, his arm comfortable around my shoulders in the cool evening air. "Just thinking about how much has changed," I replied, leaning into his warmth. "Your family has come a long way," he agreed. "It's not just them," I clarified. "It's me too. I don't need their approval anymore, which paradoxically makes it easier to accept when they offer it." Alexander nodded. "The moment you stop seeking external validation is when you become truly powerful. Is that what happened with you?" I asked, genuinely curious about his journey. "Similar, though different context," he replied thoughtfully. "For years, I chased success to prove wrong everyone who said I wouldn't amount to anything. Every milestone became about validation rather than genuine fulfillment. What changed? I achieved everything I thought I wanted and still felt empty," he said simply. "That's when I realized I needed to redefine success on my own terms." I considered this. I think that's what the wedding confrontation did for me. Facing my family's judgments head-on and rejecting them as the measure of my worth, it was terrifying but liberating. "You were magnificent that night," Alexander said, his voice warm with admiration. "Standing your ground with such grace." "I had good backup," I reminded him with a smile. "You didn't need me," he replied seriously. "You just needed to believe in your own value." The porch light cast a golden glow around us as I turned to face him fully. But having someone who saw that value from the beginning made a difference. "You came into my life at exactly the right moment. Or perhaps you came into mine," he suggested. "I was becoming cynical about authentic connections until I met you." Inside, I could hear my family's voices, the familiar cadence of their conversation now holding less power to wound me. The distance I'd created wasn't physical but emotional. I had learned to love them while releasing the need for their approval. And in that space, something healthier had begun to grow. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't approached me in that hotel lobby?" I asked. Alexander considered the question seriously. "I'd like to think we would have found each other eventually. Some connections seem inevitable in retrospect." "Pretty confident for someone who entered a stranger's family wedding under false pretenses," I teased. He laughed, the sound still one of my favorite things about him. "Best impulsive decision I ever made." The back door opened as my mother stepped onto the porch. "Dessert's ready when you are," she announced. "I made your favorite apple crisp, Abigail." "We'll be right in," I promised. After she returned inside, Alexander turned to me with a more serious expression. "Before we go back in, there's something I wanted to ask you." My heart rate quickened at his tone. "What is it?" "My lease is up next month," he said carefully. "And I've been thinking, we spend most nights together anyway, either at my place or yours. Are you asking me to move in with you?" I clarified, surprised but not opposed to the idea. "Actually, I was thinking we could find a new place together," he suggested. "Something that would be ours rather than mine or yours. A fresh start." The proposal was unexpected but felt right. Our relationship had developed naturally from that first unusual meeting, building on mutual respect and genuine connection rather than superficial attraction or social advantage. "I'd like that," I said honestly. His smile was immediate and warming. "Really?" "Really," I confirmed. "Though I have one condition." "Name it." "When we tell my family, we do it without any dramatic entrances or exits. Just a simple, straightforward announcement." Alexander laughed. "Deal." I think I've fulfilled my lifetime quota of dramatic entrances anyway. As we prepared to rejoin my family inside, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The night of Julia's wedding had been a catalyst, but the real transformation had happened in the quieter moments that followed. Setting boundaries with family. Prioritizing authentic connection over appearance. defining success on my own terms rather than society's. The woman who had walked into that wedding alone, feeling inadequate and apologetic for her choices, wouldn't recognize the person I had become. Not because I was now in a relationship with Alexander, but because I had finally recognized my own inherent worth, independent of external validation. Later that evening, as we drove home under a canopy of stars, I thought about all the women who might be experiencing what I had, feeling judged for their choices, measuring themselves against impossible standards, believing that their value was somehow tied to their relationship status. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, noticing my contemplative silence. "About how many people feel trapped by others' expectations," I replied. "How easy it is to internalize those judgments until you can't separate them from your own voice." He nodded thoughtfully. "The most difficult prison to escape is one built of others' perceptions. But it is possible to escape," I added. "To rewrite your own story." "Just like you did," he agreed, reaching for my hand across the console. As the city lights came into view, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for Alexander and our relationship, but for the difficult journey that had brought me to this place of self-acceptance. The criticism that had once wounded me deeply had ultimately become the catalyst for growth. Sometimes the most valuable things we learn come from our deepest hurts. Sometimes the moments that seem designed to break us become the foundation for rebuilding something stronger. And sometimes, walking alone into a wedding can be the first step toward finding your true self. Have you ever had a moment when family judgment pushed you to stand up for yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't defined by their relationship status. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that true validation can only come from within. Your path is yours alone to walk, and that makes it perfectly valid just as it is.